Going to be slightly late, so he's
okay.
Just the nature of things. Normally there is a go live button, but it's mysteriously disappeared. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Fake Accents Unite. Apparently YouTube has decided to take us live before I wanted to click the button, but we'll work with it. I'm joined.
It's a conspiracy.
It's a conspiracy. I'm joined, of course, as always, by the ever-present Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Oh, the ever-present. Oh, I'm now omnipresent, ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't call you omnipresent. Just ever-present on my streams. Can't seem to get rid of you. I can't think why.
Well, yes, yeah. I'm like an itch, aren't I? Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Yes, I wonder. And of course, here we have joining us the ointment to the Britisher's crusty rash. That being radical liberation. Good evening.
Hi.
It's a pleasure.
Sorry, you got me with that one, Mark. I can't keep it.
Well, I can't just let him have that. We'll also be joined by Tailed Feature, as you may have noticed from the thumbnail. I'm currently being completely destroyed by the people in my Discord for having such a terrible thumbnail and background for the stream. So if anyone wants to design us a new way of doing the stream,
the ultimate response to all those people who are always criticizing is go on, do better.
Well, the difficulty is that they can. It's not their stream. What's the motivation? I may provide. I'd like to provide a financial incentive, but I can't at the moment. But if you have ways of formatting this thing that you think would be more efficacious to a nicer looking stream, then please do feel free to chime in. That'd be great. Why is chat over Radlib's face? Because it is there at the moment. I can move it around if we like. I can pop it up there. There we go. It was placed there, I think, because of the stream with Sargon. Obviously, that had to be taken down. A few people on that stream have been asking why it was taken down. So if you weren't here at the end of last week's stream, that was taken down because one of my guests is currently being attacked. He's being harassed at work and threatened with doxing and all sorts. And that stream was being used against him, as well as a couple of other bits and pieces, including clips from that stream, which I then had to copyright strike on other channels. So it's all been a bit of a mare. But at his request, we've taken that down for the time being. But it is still up for members. So if you want to see that stream, you're desperate for it, then please feel free. Just the lowest tier of membership will get you, but I'm hoping it will discourage any trolls from getting to it. I'm hoping that it will go live for public consumption at some point in the future, but we'll see. Obviously, last week we got criticism because it seemed to become a lot more of the Hell and Dale show. Well, there is no Hell and Dale on this stream, but I'm hoping that we can cover an expansive range of topics regardless. Couple of super chats.
I could always talk more about the Romans to give it the feel as though Hell and Dale were here.
Oh God!
Did she? I did not listen to that episode as yet, Britisher. Did she sufficiently cover Romans for your taste?
Well, there was a moment where it seemed a certain someone lost control, and the two of us went into Roman land together. Yes,
we need to learn the Latin, Britisher, for rabbit hole.
It was. What can I say? It was. He basically had it under control until the super chats, threw a spanner in the works, and. It was quite obviously designed to get the two of us talking about it, and yes, the rest was history.
I have to say, I managed to. I did manage to. I asked the question, who is your favourite Roman emperor? And this was something which was ad-libbed off a super chat. At which point, Helen decides to go off on one about how... she was a lovely guest, but she went off on one about... who was it?
The Institutes of Gaius.
The Gaius, yes. This great litigator, and everyone was going, that's not an emperor for a start.
No, it wasn't an emperor, it was a leader.
Did I say a leader?
Yes, a Roman leader.
More fool me for my poor wording. But, yes, we had a great merry chat there.
For what it's worth, Britisher, I only use Google Translate, so don't trust it. But lepus foramen. Lepus being rapid, I recognize that. Lepus, and then foramen is unfamiliar to me, but that's what Google Translate gave me.
Well, there you go. See, we have learned
now
something.
We have a term for when things go down the Roman road, shall we say?
Well, we definitely save that for later. We do have a couple of super chats which come in, so I shall round those off, and then we will get into the meat of the matter. So Coney Current Year says, this CHAZ saga would make a great Frasier episode. I'm not that familiar with...
Yes, indeed it would.
I'm not that familiar with Frasier myself.
Well, he is the sitcom is situated in Seattle.
Okay. Oh yeah, excellent.
So you can
yes.
you can kind of see Frasier getting a phone call that Niles is being held hostage in CHAZ.
So Goen says 132 seconds late added to the total. First of all, are you actually keeping a total? That's quite insane. We'll have to have a season closer at some point where all of our lateness is added up and see how many episodes worth that actually comes to.
Well, who knows? In that case, there might actually be a person on the planet who can out-spreadsheet Academic Agent.
Well, we'd hope so. I mean, the man himself is not that great with statistics. We know this. He just has everyone do it for him.
But is somebody keeping a running total of how many seconds late we have been over the entire series?
Yes, it's nice to have that kind of spite in the chat, really, isn't it? But the other thing is this week it's entirely my fault. My internet cut out at 8:27, so that was great. I had to sort that out in short order. Thankfully, came up nice and quickly. Finally, Drunk Shovel. He's very generous, actually. Thanks for the $10.
I've now got a picture of you up some kind of telegraph pole with a screwdriver fixing your internet.
No, it's not as we're not living in the dark ages here, British. Something just plug and unplug, turn it off and on again, usually resetting it does the
do. For any would-be artists out there, if there is an image you need, just a bit of inspiration to set you on your way.
The meme of me fixing the internet for the whole of my area, yes. Drunk Shovel says the CHAZ ordered I love that we're calling it the CHAZ, ordered pizza to bolster their food supplies. Pizza from the United States to the People's Republic of CHAZ. Truly, we are a benevolent nation.
Well, the best bit, I thought, was when apparently, because a very short time after they had occupied the area, the whole place was a complete mess. So the Seattle authorities sent in some street sweeps, which was helpful. And apparently, the local authority there has also sent in portable toilet cabins.
Right.
So we call them porta potties or on the spot.
Oh, here they're called portaloos. So I was struggling not to use portaloos in case all the Americans went, "What the hell is he talking about?" But so that is how self-sufficient they are. That they need their they need their porta cabins provided by the local authority, of whom they have declared independence.
Yeah, with the idea being that the local authority is guessing that soon enough they'll have to clean up whatever's mess left behind. So they might as well kind of be proactive,
I'm just trying to find. I had a load of shots. I've watched about 2 or 3 meme compilations, effectively, of the goings on in CHAZ. So obviously there was the orderings of pizzas.
Yeah, I did want to say, Mark, I am a little concerned about the balance of trade between CHAZ and the United States.
Yes, it seems disproportionately in.
It might be, yeah.
In the United States, I mean, of course, you yourself as a staunch anarchist, Radlib, this utopia that is being created in the midst of Seattle. How do you feel? When are you moving to be with your people? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I've raised my children hearing about anarchy and stuff, so. Some of the teenagers are actually following the CHAZ story and saying, "Dad, it's really going well." And I'm like, "Oh boy, when do I break it to them?"
No. Yes, I know that they apparently, as chat is highlighting, they've changed their name to CHOP. They've gone from CHAZ to CHOP. And I think
missed this. What is it?
So this is today. So CHOP means Capitol Hill Occupied Protest, but it's also because they're now, despite the fact that they spray painted "You are now leaving America" all over it. I think most of them have actually worked out that this is not a very good idea in the long run. So they've gone. There was a speech that was given by a man as part of it, and he basically said that he was invoking the language of the French Revolution and saying, what happened to the people who opposed the revolution, and they were like, they got chopped. So of course they are
didn't get with the revolution.
Yes, they are the CHOP.
Yeah,
but despite
yes, it's a little bit historically ignorant, isn't it?
Yes, it is just a little bit, isn't it? Good grief. Do you want to explain this one, Britisher? Because it's
just the period of the reign of the guillotine eventually was referred to by the French themselves as the Terror.
Yes,
because everybody got chopped, including, of course, the people who were doing the chopping in the first place.
Yes, big or small, it was just.
So even Monsieur Robespierre got the chop eventually. So it's yes, you're kind of in black fingernail territory, aren't you?
It's really kind of nails down the chalkboard. You've just got.
It is kind of fun to, pull up Robespierre's Wikipedia, and instead of death, it says execution.
The whole language of it is steeped in as we call it, historical
name for it. Given that we're talking Latin, and that would be patria diptere. Which could kind of translate into land of the flies.
Oh, yes. Who's going to be the poor piggy roasted on fire?
On the naming, I note that at least in one headline, I guess they're confused by the new name, and so they called it CHAZ/CHOP. And I actually think that's even better than either of them on their own. CHAZ CHOP.
The CHAZ CHOP?
I don't know.
Yeah, they have to do it that way around.
I think there's some branding here.
They have to do it that way around, because otherwise CHOP CHAZ might actually sound like a slogan against themselves.
The CHOP CHAZ. The worst thing is that when I was growing up, in the long ago. In fact, when my siblings, because I'm the oldest, when my younger siblings were growing up, they were quite into a TV show called Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. And there's a character in that who calls himself the CHAZ. And he is an insufferable, arrogant child who goes through virtually no character development through the whole thing. And so whenever anyone mentions we're going to the CHAZ, we're reporting on the CHAZ, I just, arrogant pricks in black come up in my head. Which is not to say it hasn't been all successful. I mean, they did try and host a dodgeball game. Do you know what the outcome of the dodgeball game was, gentlemen?
How many were shot?
It wasn't quite that bad. It didn't descend. But after, I believe, 2 points were scored or something like that, they got into a disagreement about the third, and this basically turned into a brawl with a young, large, rotund lady coming in, screaming something to the extent of "We're supposed to be on each other's side," or something to that effect, and they were telling her to shut up and go away.
Have to throw in Woody Allen's joke. He talked about a social work class that teaches you how to turn street gangs into basketball teams, or vice versa.
Well, you see, the only thing I can think of is that in future, I mean, given that this is the future, these people are obviously way ahead of us. They are visionaries. So in future, everybody is going to take a knee for the national anthem and then beat each other up over the results of the game.
Yes, effectively.
Hey, I did want to throw in a little bit of historical context, which non-Americans may not know. Most Americans probably don't know.
Go for it.
There actually have been a lot of experiments in United States history. It is a bit anarchic in traditionally in the U.S. And so we've actually had a lot of like communes over. I'm not talking about since the 60s. I'm talking since the 1960s. I'm talking about 19th, 18th century communist experiments of various sorts. For example, a good friend of mine is from a place called Fairhope, Alabama.
Okay.
And it was started as a radical utopian socialist Georgist single tax colony.
Right.
Now it's just some town.
Because that didn't roll off the tongue very well, and people didn't keep to it very well.
Yeah, now it's just some town my friend grew up in. But the point is, there's been a lot of these sorts of things. They don't tend to go well, as it so happens. But it is an interesting history. I think when I'm older and retired, I wouldn't mind just reading a book about all the various communes over the last few hundred years.
I thought you were going to say when you're old and retired, you wouldn't mind starting one. Just see whether or not
given that I have 8 children and 4.5 acres, you could say I kind of am doing one in my own way.
Yeah, you're founding your own.
Right.
Given the history of communes, didn't Pythagoras already live in a commune? I think he did.
I have no idea.
I think the idea of kind of experimental societies and whatever is not at all a new one. What, of course, does set this apart, and also sets apart some of these kind of protests of the 80s and whatever, and late 70s, is the fact that if it's in an urban environment and you just basically occupy some houses, that's different than if you actually just start your own society somewhere out in the countryside.
Yes, these were. They forcibly claimed these areas. They effectively stole the area. It's also notable that whilst we're joking and laughing about this sort of thing, the media coverage on it, especially from mainstream outlets like CNN, from what I can see, have been talking about it as, it's majority peaceful. It's got a kind of country fair kind of atmosphere.
There's a festive feel.
And yes, and this appears to be largely the case during daylight hours. As soon as night comes, it kind of descends into, more of a much more dangerous place to be. I believe they had their first deportation today. A Mexican man. A Mexican man.
Yes.
We're not sure about the exact details.
They sent a Mexican across the border.
Yes, they did.
You can't make it up, Britisher. I mean, it's incredible. Hey, real quick, I watched this segue. So Britisher brought up Pythagoras. I found it said Pythagoras's commune members. I guess he started the commune, maybe? I don't know.
According to CHAZ, he did,
including women accepted on equal terms with men, had to surrender their possessions into the collective pot, for he taught that friends have all things in common, and friendship is equality. And I bet Tailed would love the idea of friends having all things in common, right? And sharing possessions, right, Tailed?
That was a great way to introduce Tailed Feature into the conversation. Welcome to the stream, Tailed.
Good evening.
Great to see you.
Yes. Did you know that there's a commune in Essex?
Is there now? It wouldn't surprise me, knowing what Essex is like.
Really?
Yeah, an anarchist, pacifist, open house.
There are certainly lots of...
It's a single building, Tailed.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's cottages and stuff, or it's just one big building that everybody lives in. I don't know a huge amount about it, but I know it's been going since the 60s.
I know there are several.
Wow.
There are several semi-successful housing co-ops in London, but they have a very strict screening process for new entrants. But it is very cheap to live there, although you don't have any property.
Unless you have a portrait of Jeremy Corbyn on your right buttock, you don't get in.
Yes.
I would have to be the left.
If you have any interest in ever owning property or land, you're not welcome, and that sort of thing, definitely.
Because there's communes in, I think it's in the Netherlands, and they were made. Basically, there was a whole load of social housing that was about to get knocked down. And so a group of anarchists said, well, we'll just live in this area completely autonomously. And apparently the government went, yep, okay, not a problem.
Well,
so it's all these sort of high rises and everything. And I know that because my band once got asked to go and play at one of these places.
Well,
I
well,
didn't
in,
go.
I could just
one of the
see
things.
authorities. I could just see the authorities saying, "Oh no, you can live there, no problem." And then he just turns around, looks at one of his assistants, and goes, "Open the dikes."
It's just we've rigged the place with explosives. Yeah, you can go and live there.
Were they going to pay you, Tailed?
I can't remember, honestly. It was probably about 10 years ago now. But I think that was maybe why we didn't go, because we're like, well, we have to get there.
And we don't trust that there's money on the other end.
Exactly, yeah.
One of the funny things, interestingly, about British history, just for Radlib and the Britishers' convenience, is a thing called squatters' rights used to be around in Britain. So, this is how the first women's shelters that were set up by Erin Pizzey came to be, because they occupied a number of derelict buildings in particular places and used them as women's shelters. And in a similar way, a lot of these housing communes were acquired, shall we say, and the reason why nobody owns them is because they're owned by the squatters, technically. So it used to be a thing where if you could squat inside a derelict building for, I can't remember what the period of time.
Long, yes.
Yes,
it was just a certain track record to show for.
Yes, to show. Then they
10 years or something.
It was years, but if you could manage it, then you couldn't be evicted. Effectively.
The fact that they never found the body of the little old lady who once owned the place and is buried somewhere under the patio is.
Been watching too much Brookside, Britisher.
Or yes, keep your informative murder porn out of the stream, Britisher. Ridiculous. Yes, chat saying I think it was 12 years without contesting. Without contestment. I mean, it's one way to prevent people from buying up large portions of London for 20 years and then selling it on, I suppose. But not sure if it's that effective. But it's not. It doesn't exist now, so it doesn't work in the same way. But this is how certain things came to be without them appearing to have been economically viable at any point. What was I saying? We were talking about CHAZ. Yes, so when night descends in CHAZ, people have been fighting over who robbed who. People who have zipped up their tents have come back to find everything missing. There are people who are arguing because all of the streets are completely covered in vandalism in terms of graffiti and whatnot, and people are arguing now about what gets to stay and what gets to be added, because now it's part of the landscape, and they put Black Lives Matter in great big letters across the road and so on. But people who've moved into these now derelict buildings and shops are not very happy when someone comes along and sprays "all cops are pigs" in great big red letters across their new front window. So there's arguments and that sort of thing. I saw a bus driver literally pick a man up and body him to the ground.
Yep.
And it looked like he broke his spine. It was quite the collision in that side of things. Everything that points to a violent and just a very unsafe place to live. The only people who appeared to be enjoying themselves that I saw was a man squatting on the gardens with 2 sticks, who was clearly high on something, absolutely off his head, and trying to...
It was an interesting form of ploughing, wasn't it?
Yes, he was trying to spin his sticks around and do kung fu or something, and had absolutely no coordination whatsoever. So his sticks went everywhere, and he was just kind of squatting there in the middle of the dirt. And similarly, another man who was naked and jogging around the outside of CHAZ, talking about how he needed to be naked, and he needed to go find his kids, and they needed to be naked too. It was very disturbing.
I just had a thought when you were talking about, everything's fine in the daylight until darkness falls, and it had sort of, how do we say, it's rather evocative, isn't it? So you can't help but miss this particular lyric. Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Creatures crawl in search of blood to terrorize your neighborhood.
Oh,
and whosoever shall be found without the soul for getting down must stand and face the hounds of hell and rot inside a corpse's shell. Thank you very much, Mr. Vincent Price.
Yeah, that's sort of what I imagined your voice doing, but I was hoping that you were going to do the freaks come out at night, because that would be more entertaining to hear in your accent, British.
Oh, we've had a bit of.
I will have to look that up.
We've had a bit of fan art sent in. Are you ready for this? So, having been thoroughly told off for our current stream background, we've been provided with this image. Here we are. It's going live now. There we go. So this is what we got. Yeah, I've got the image for you here, but it's in stream chat. There we go.
Oh, thank you.
We are. These are the gardens, I think, of CHAZ, and we are the busy bees going around.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I should take this, because either we are Mancunians, or we are actually supporters of Napoleon.
Well, Napoleon.
Yes, the Napoleon, the Bonaparte party, the actual, not the party, the family itself had a bee as its symbol.
Oh, I see.
I thought you were going to say like they were called the Yellow Jackets or something.
Also, of course, I am hearing Karel Gott.
Use your references, Britisher. Assume that we are children.
There was a children's cartoon decades ago called the Die Biene Maya, the bee Maya. Okay. And it had a wise cricket and whatever else. And Karel Gott was the man who sung the title music, and so much so it actually became quite the hit across Europe.
I see,
but not in Britain.
Well, this is one of the things where it's quite clear that continental Europe and Britain are completely separate entities. You can ask people about stars on the continent, and they will have never heard of them.
Yes.
Funnily enough, the
because
Europeans are much more likely to know of people who are known over here than vice versa.
Yeah. Well, that's because, but you have to
sing in English.
You have to remember as well that the Germans venerate David Hasselhoff, so you can't trust.
There is that.
Continental judgment.
Well, actually, Mr. Karel Gott was a Czech exile. He actually became a star behind the Iron Curtain, and then at some point, I think when they sent him touring around the West in order to show how superior communism was, he decided to stay there.
Okay.
So he is actually he was a bit of a star in the East and the West, which was quite an achievement.
He was known as the Golden Voice of Prague.
I believe so. Yes, something like that.
He sold an estimated 50 to 100 million records worldwide, and yet never heard of him.
Yep. But as I say, that's quite a number, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, you wonder how much
there are other countries out there that.
Yes, and other people who live rather well, all things considered. But no, I'm not entirely sure where that anecdote was heading there, British.
No, I can't. That was some tangent.
Oh, you don't mind a tangent, but usually, I can't even remember where it jumped off from.
His best-known song would have been Die Biene Maya, the little bee Maya, which was known to all children over there. So obviously, when you've got the little bees flying around, yes, it.
Okay, from the bees. Okay, you are a hornet, Britisher, in this image.
Are we the killer hornets that
as
are
you
meant
should.
to be arriving?
You've got apparently reefer on you there, Tails. Radical liberation being the harmless honeybee that he is, and I am the bee from Bee Movie, and apparently beardless and with much less hair for the current climate.
You're a Seinfeld bee.
I'm a Seinfeld bee for the time being.
Because that was Seinfeld, wasn't it? The Bee Movie. I think that came from Seinfeld.
I don't know, but it shouldn't be able to fly and all that.
But no. Anyway, right. I'm Barry B. Benson. That's the thing to take away from it. Okay.
Well, if we're talking about children's things, did you see that Tony the Tiger is trending on Twitter?
Why?
Well, let me.
Is it the furries again?
No. I was wondering what this was all about, and then this woman called Fiona Onasanya, something like that, who has tweeted at Kellogg's UK, as you're yet to reply to my email, Cocoa Pops and Rice Krispies.
just the ultimate Karen there. Like, as you have yet to reply to my email.
Yes, within the allotted 48 hours.
Okay.
Cocoa Pops and Rice Krispies have the same composition, except for the fact that Cocoa Pops are brown and chocolate flavoured. So I was wondering why Rice Krispies have 3 white boys representing the brand and Cocoa Pops have a monkey.
Okay. May I go?
Racist cereal. We've got cereal racists.
Serial racists in both. There's a double entendre has been identified, ladies and gentlemen.
May I just interject something here that might be of interest?
Go.
In July 2018, Onasanya was charged with perverting the court of justice in relating to 2 speeding incidents which occurred in 2017. This is an MP, or is it a former MP? Is she still in? I'm not sure.
Right.
Yes, this is someone who is not entirely divorced of controversy.
No. It's 3 white boys. I mean, they're little nose, not 3 little white boys, as far as I can remember,
I know, she can't even get our culture right.
No, they can't even get our culture right. And then Cocoa Pops was because they were part of the jungle, right? And there wasn't just the monkey, there was loads of different animals.
Well,
and it was just that the monkey was the ringleader.
I remember way back when I was once on a live stream when I think it was an American incident emerged where they had been, you know how they sometimes have like packet art on the back of the packets, which they change once in a while. And in this case, there was some picture with lots of busy it wasn't, I don't even know what they were, but one of those cereals. It was a Kellogg's one.
Right.
And they were all kind of dressed up as, having some sort of profession. And somebody spotted that the janitor among the professions was a darker one.
Oh, no.
And all hell broke loose. And, yes, eventually Kellogg's basically got down on its knees and said, oh, we're changing this at once. And I remember when this came up on the live stream, the British had a bit of a meltdown. For about 10 minutes, I couldn't stop laughing.
Did you have so much of a meltdown that you just referred to yourself in the third person?
Yes. It was one of those moments where I just dissolved. I couldn't stop. Because it was so ludicrous that they were now quarreling about characters. Well, about, ingredients in cereal being depicted as characters was now an issue. And I was just here, tears running down my cheeks. And I just couldn't stop laughing. It was, yes, it was a traumatic event. What can I say?
Some people will fight. Like it's got to the point now when it comes to.
I think it was corn pops, for the sake of completion.
When it comes to all of these things, there's just certain, I suppose, animals or various different avatars, if you call them. That are now blacklisted by advertising just because of the nature of any controversy that they might be tangentially linked to. Monkeys are now completely off the table, unless they're obviously gunning for some sort of white supremacist cereal as opposed to chocolate. Maybe if the monkeys supported the white Cocoa Pops and they had some sort of other animal, even perhaps an albino monkey did the actual Cocoa Pops.
But white something.
But what I want to know is why Tony the Tiger is trending as opposed to just generally. Like what's the relevance of the tiger tail?
Oh, probably something to do with the British Raj tigers.
India, yeah.
Oh, for goodness sake!
I mean, we're now in a situation where, due to the nature of things and this accusatory style of proceeding, you could in Britain sooner advertise something with Genghis Khan than you could with Sir Francis Drake.
Yes, because not enough people know enough about Genghis Khan to realise what. Like, it's just not. Well, I'd say Genghis Khan is fairly common knowledge, but no one's calling for his great monolith in Mongolia to be pulled down, are they? You know?
I've not heard a peep. No.
No, not a fragment of a second. We will come on to the statue controversy in a bit, but I do just want to keep us on track with CHAZ before we get too distracted with serial-based anecdotes.
Okay, can I just? I think
no.
Shut up.
Go ahead.
No, I think Tony the Tiger's actually trending because people are taking the piss out of this on Asanya.
Oh, what a surprise!
Because someone said we should ban Tony the Tiger because it makes fun of ginger people.
And how dare he? How dare he promote an orange cereal alongside himself?
Exactly, that is just cultural appropriation. We should just get rid of monkeys in general, and then because monkeys themselves are probably deemed racist.
And so the genocide of the simian species began. What a tangent for the stream to go on. I'm glad that anyone listening to this won't take that out of context. Don't clip that clip of me saying about simian genocides. Thank you very much, everybody. Yes. Orangutans, a protest about Orange Man Bad. Yes, very, very, very droll. Painted blue, very droll. Right, I'll bring us up to speed with the super chats so that we're not completely derailed. And I do want to keep things going. So, Midlander says, Godspeed to AA. Hope his problems clear up. Let us pay homage to his streams by bringing up sissies, Palpatine, and New England Puritans. I think we could just about stand to mention the Puritans on this one, but no sissies or Palpatine apologists. Thank you very much, and have none of that nonsense here. Drunk Shovel says, pretty sure none of them have ever seen a farm. So much for the collective farms. I'm sure they'll eat well. Stalin smiles down upon them. Yes, this is the collective farms of CHAZ, which happen to be...
Yeah, so didn't we see, like... they just threw some dirt on top of grass.
Well, the image currently being used...
They didn't turn it over, right?
The image currently being used, I think, as the background for the bees is one of these farms. It is basically some compost bags which have been emptied out in a broad circle with enough land to perhaps fill one person after 2 seasons of growing. I don't know if they believe that, like Minecraft, their crops will be ready in 2 or 3 days. But I don't think that's how actual farming works. Not to mention that unless they have some sort of irrigation system in the middle of summer, in the middle of Seattle, things aren't going to grow particularly well. So
perhaps this is where
Go ahead.
Perhaps this is where the Britishers' point about this being an urban commune as opposed to the traditional, more rural communes comes into play. They may not have, the agricultural knowledge you'd hope for, maybe.
Not quite there. I love the fact that it was in a circular, composition, in order to kind of give the impression of sort of one of those Midwest farms that is in a rather barren territory, high tech with those kind of water sprinklers going around, because anybody else would really make a square field, wouldn't they?
Well, I mean,
what I would love to know most of all is that farm. Is it a kolkhoz or a sovkhoz?
I don't think I know, and I don't know that they know.
One.
Explain for the plebeians, please, radical liberation.
I'll let Britisher do it. Kolkhoz, that's the collective farm. But what's the sovkhoz?
I think the sovkhoz is not run by a separate collective, but by the state, so by the Soviet. So they had these 2 different types of communist farming in the Soviet Union.
I should have known that. I only read the history of the Russian Revolution recently. Should have been obvious, really.
And this is why people are giving it the meme name of the Soviet Union.
I thought that was mainly because I thought that was mainly because they requested soya beans and vegan meat substitutes.
Oh wow!
That's
I'm
part
sure
of their
that's part of it. Yeah,
that's
but
part of
anyway,
their shopping list.
or would
right
you
there.
prefer to be called Antifastan?
Antifastan? Oh, personally, I think CHAZ itself is a bit of a distraction from.
That is an interesting one, though. Do they have Antifa officially in CHAZ?
I don't think so. Not officially. But I don't think that you would find anyone who would be unsympathetic to the Antifa cause.
It's just because if there is officially Antifa in CHAZ, the question would be, whom are they Antifa against?
In their own state. Well, of course, they're keeping the fascists out, because anyone can transit into the zone if they want.
Yeah, maybe they're in charge of border control.
They're effectively
borders, that is hilarious.
Yes,
fact that they're really up on borders is just...
Yes.
Yeah.
They may not have picked a wise location, right? When they decided to pick the centre of a city as the site for their... they're effectively engulfed. They've effectively pincer movement to themselves. And hence the giant border, hence the eviction of a Mexican, which is just the most ironic thing.
A border that has a fence, that is
control.
Policed, that is just, what were they thinking?
They've decided, though, that they're not... They've decided that they're going to settle disputes through community action, which has basically descended into a shouting match. There was a woman who was screaming down a microphone, "You shall not silence the black community," at a man who was going, "I am also black." And she said something to the effect of, "You're not black enough."
Didn't you see the stuff about they were going to have a council for when there's conflict? So
yes.
It's sort of like
a
judicial council, and you got to watch as they started intersectionalizing it or whatever.
Yeah, so originally...
So it started with there'll have to be, one black man and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
and
then
there had to be criminals, but the best part about the criminals was, like people who'd been in jail because they need representation. It said you had to have been convicted of a violent crime.
Oh my god! I didn't.
You don't just want You don't want some pickpocket.
So
you really want somebody who's.
Did the council intervene once the dodgeball brawl erupted?
No. So the council has not been. Listen. So the council hasn't been established, but they floated the idea of a council. And the original idea was a black man, a black woman, and a white woman. And then they said, in the interest of inclusivity, we have now changed it so that it is a black man, a black woman, a trans black person, a black ex-con, and a crossed off the white woman. In the interest of inclusivity, they removed the white people, the white woman, and replaced her with the ex-con and the trans person. I believe it was. And it may have been someone else in there as well. But basically, that's the general idea. But they can't decide on who it is. There was also the question of this chap Raz, or Raz, who was... Raz.
Sounds lovely.
The warlord, supposedly. And they were talking about how he effectively became somewhat of a community leader in there. But he just seems like... he seemed actually quite reasonable. It seems like the stories about him have been... exaggerated until in his interview he's like, it's all peace here, it's lovely, I wouldn't consider myself to be above anyone. It's like, so I see that you're open carrying there in the gun-free zone, why is that? And he's just trying to bluster and defend why he has to get... Apparently it's because now that he's been identified by the far right as a leader within the leaderless state, that he has received death threats and people are after him, so he has to carry a gun to defend against all the fascists. Also, people were noting that they're imposing daily levies upon their white residents. It is a voluntary, involuntary tax, in effect.
A polite way of saying extortion.
Of $10 a day from white people to all black people. So they have to find a way to raise enough money to give all the black people $10. And as they are disproportionately black in the zone, from what I've seen, I'm happy to be corrected on that, then this means that the white people are paying substantially more than that for the for the benefit of effectively being unmolested and left to go about their business inside the zone.
I'm just wondering, when you were describing what was he called, Raz, walking around with his open carry gun. In the background, I just heard the song playing. Please don't forsake me, oh my darling. Perhaps
don't
somebody is going to get the
me,
reference.
oh my darling. Is this a Red Dwarf reference?
No.
No.
High
Okay.
Moon.
Because it's definitely in Red Dwarf.
Gary Cooper.
It is.
Yes.
So I was just looking up an article on Raz, and at the end it said something like this could end up near the end. It said this could end up in a Waco-like disaster of violence. And at first I was like, yeah, sure, they only do that to right wingers. That's not necessarily true. Maybe that's true nowadays, but in May 13th, 1985, MOVE, M-O-V-E, all caps, a Black liberation group, was bombed by the Philadelphia Police Department right in the middle of an urban environment. 11 people were killed, including 5 children and the founder of the organization. 61 homes were destroyed.
Good grief.
When you say bombed, I mean, are we talking a device dropped from an aircraft?
A satchel bomb, a demolition, or I'm sorry, I don't know that it was dropped. A satchel bomb, a demolition device typically used in combat, laced with Tovex and C4 explosives. They dropped it on the MOVE organization. I don't know how they dropped it.
Alan
I've heard about this. I don't know the whole story, but what was the year on this? 1985.
Alan Zeibelman in chat says, I was 3 blocks from MOVE when that happened. It was from a helicopter, apparently.
Okay, from a helicopter. Yeah, so maybe in these more politically correct times, they're less likely to drop a bomb on a BLM movement, but it has been done. So,
the precedent has been established. Is that what you're saying?
I'd be a little concerned myself.
If we had nukes, mini nukes. There's no to say anyway. One thing that I am noting is what happens when this all blows over, because they're calling it CHOP now. It's an Occupy protest. The Democrats might cuck and grant them what they want in terms of police abolition and so on and so forth. In the local vicinity. It's not something that Trump will stand for on a national scale, certainly. But the Democrats might, treat the whole thing as an experiment and run the city. What happens is, what I think is going to happen is that is exactly what happened with Detroit after the Detroit riots, which is that anyone with any common sense and the capital to do so is going to flee the area as soon as possible. And so you're going to sell up and you're going to move, regardless of whether or not your property is worth. Assuming your property is worth anything at the end of the day, once this whole thing has gone through, and you're going to have a lot of capital flight, and no one's going to want to invest in the area because nothing will be safe, and we're going to see Detroit Part 2 again. I hope that you've been to see Seattle and enjoyed it whilst it's still here, because it seems like it's all going to go to shit. Thoughts from either side of the pond, really?
Well, I mean, I think you've got, when it comes to sort of house prices and property and all those kind of things, you don't just need to look at the immediate environs of CHAZ, CHOP, or whatever, but you can, I would assume that odd things will be happening to house prices in Minneapolis right now, when they are kind of announcing that they are defunding the police and want some community scheme.
Right, and we discussed this on my show the last time we had one, and I introduced the notion of mob uncertainty. That is, what is the effect on business when you think there's a reasonable possibility that a mob will come and burn your business down? That might discourage investing in your business, opening a new business. You might even just leave that area where you think it's likely.
Yeah, you might be
older. Go ahead.
You might be enticed to take the insurance money and set up somewhere else.
Right. I'm imagining some older small business people going, I think it's time to retire.
Yeah.
Definitely. I just don't know if anything can be done to save it at this point.
Save which? These areas where the rioting has happened and where CHAZ Chop, as I prefer to call them. CHAZ Chop has taken over.
The Chop CHAZ, it's not necessarily about the actual. Like, I don't think that CHAZ Chop is ever going to survive, right? Certainly not long term.
Their name hasn't lasted very long already,
No,
has it?
I mean, they're descending into chaos, and they have absolutely no standards. There's very little sanitation. If they are there for any long period of time and they keep on... I mean, I think one of the reasons that they have decided on a name change, aside from the fact that they got annoyed that they think that it was a meme that started the CHAZ name, and they don't think it's found very impressive, so they're not very happy with it. But also, I think if they... the whole rhetoric around whether or not they're going to be declared an independent state would... obviously threaten things like electricity, water, power, because all it takes is the government to say, you want your own place? Feel free, we secede this to you, and with all the maintenance that requires. And so all they do is they cut the power, they cut the water, there's no way for them to get things in there. Their currency is they have to use dollars, but they'll have to create their own currency because it's not going to be welcome there, and they'll pursue legal action and whatnot. And anyway, it's all terribly messed up. So if they try and continue the way they were going in that direction, so now that it's become an Occupy protest, well, they're just protesters occupying an area until something is done. It's like a strike action, right? I think this will end when they start getting hungry. And that will happen.
I love it how you say that they feel the name isn't sufficiently impressive, CHAZ.
Yes.
And you just can't help but wonder whether they want to rename themselves the Grand Duchy of Burgundy. Because Passport to Pimlico does spring to mind.
Could be the new Sealand.
Yes, I was going to say, the other thing, there's a meme going around, the Virgin Autonomous Zone versus the CHAZ Sealand. For those of you who don't know, Sealand has been around for about 50 years, and whilst it's got its trouble with money laundering, it's effectively an offshore oil platform that was bought and is supposed to become a utopia, and it survived for 50 years by selling titles to wealthy idiots, in fact. Who are, interested. You can become a lord or a duchess of Sealand, and you can get your square foot there, effectively. So they have their own passports and all sorts. And the British government has admitted they have no right to infringe upon their sovereignty. So there's that. But
yeah.
They were taken over by pirates at one point. At which point the owners had to retake it with an armed mercenary group, and it is kept under eye because it is known to be a place where people launder their money. So
I mean, I think it's one of those sort of grey areas rather than the British government can't intervene. I think if the British government really got it into its mind, because I don't think it's an oil platform. Wasn't it a gun platform?
Yeah, I think it was a military thing, yeah. But did it also not go on fire?
Yes, it was largely damaged at one point, yes.
Yeah, after the main guy that set it up, I think he'd died. Or was very ill anyway. But yeah, I mean it's kind of the same as Rockall as well. That's another
It's an old World War II anti-aircraft platform, yes.
Yeah.
But as a Rockall at least is a natural phenomenon, whereas this was built, and it was built by the British government. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also
it was originally called
Rockall is British clay. Just putting that out there.
It was originally called HM Fort Ruffs. I don't know if that's how you guys would pronounce it. Roughs.
Yeah, Ruffs.
Fort Ruffs. Kind of a cool name, actually.
It's better than Sealand, anyway.
Well, then again, I mean, in America now we've got the debate about what forts are supposed to be called, whether they can be called brag and whatever.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Because
it is really
various military installations can't be named after generals from the south.
It is really
Right.
it is really a sign of our times with these sorts of things. Okay, so just moving tangentially on, because we're kind of dragging on this issue a bit now. There is a letter from a woman named Cherry Wilson, who says to the BBC, "Should I remove or reply to my racist Facebook friend?" Okay, so this is obviously with CHAZ all going on in America, the Black Lives Matter protests going on in America. We've obviously got Statue Gate going on over here, not to mention our own protests and riots, and we will come on to those. But in normie sphere, this person is saying, effectively using the BBC as an agony aunt here, and saying, I know this person from Facebook from where I grew up. Normally I scroll past their statuses, slagging off their ex or their results from a Facebook quiz. But with a focus on George Floyd's death, anti-racism protests and debate around removing British statues, they've moved to posting casually racist stuff. So they go on and basically complain about this person,
disagreeing with them,
basically. and then it comes to them.
I'm not seeing examples in this article of this casually racist stuff, because I'm wondering, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if the Ms. Cherry Wilson here actually showed us what was making her so mad. A lot of people would roll their eyes.
Exactly. So nobody, she's given no examples of this, and BBC News does not provide any. And then she talks about the racism that she experiences every day. I have been called racist. I think it reminds me of all the racist names I've been called. No examples. All the times I've been asked, "Where are you from?" And I'm from England. No, where are you from? Oh, you mean, why do I have this colour skin? It's like, no. Again, no example of this, or how frequent it is, whether, who's
asking her that on Facebook.
Also, well, I think this is just in general life experience, people asking where you're from. But it's also a question about your heritage, right? So,
right. Does it get me off the hook? Does it get me off the hook that I ask the same thing of white people, and I'm like, wait, is that a Dutch name or a German name?
Yes. Where are you from? Where's your family from? Where, what they treat that as it's a racial angle.
Now, to be fair, it's a little bit different, right? Because unless you're a Native American in the United States, we know you're not from here, right?
Yeah.
And I guess even they weren't from here if you really go back, right? But in England, maybe it seems more offensive because there is like an indigenous people who is majority, right? And so once you say, where are you really from? You're basically saying you're clearly not descended from the original inhabitants of the island of England, right?
Well, it's also interesting because, so just tangentially here, Heritage England basically released a video. I think it's called something along the lines of "What Did the Romans Do for Us?" And it asserts that 66% of Britain was non-white during the time of the Romans. Does that strike you as particularly accurate there, Britisher?
Yeah.
Fact check, Britisher.
No.
Fact check.
Apparently,
I think we can honestly say that is complete and utter garbage.
Yes,
the Italians are considered to be white.
Yes,
Where did they say that all of these 2/3 of Britons who were non-white went? They just were killed?
No. Where did
they come from to start with?
So apparently,
North Africa.
So apparently they're arguing that the Italians and the Greeks are clearly not white. But secondly, that
I think Sargon agrees with that, right?
And secondly, that there's this idea that it's an argument in favour of the idea that Britain has always been culturally and tonally diverse. So,
well, I mean, first off, I've heard this argument before, again and again, that the Italians and the Greeks aren't really white, yada yada yada. Why don't we ask them? Because I think they think they're white.
Yes.
So, but when it comes to ladies like this Miss Cherry, I first and foremost just want to know what her sisters, Pamplemousse and Tangerine, think.
Oh, grief.
It is a silly name. Come on.
It's a very silly name. Anyway, so going back to this story, just off the English heritage thing. So she says the only thing that she gives us a sort of, not a concrete example, but something I can believe happening is me and my sister couldn't get into a London club because they wanted a European crowd, code for white, and all of the which I can exactly see the clubs doing, because if you want to find somewhere in London which is actually racist and actually sexist, it is the clubs. If you are ugly, you do not get into certain clubs unless you have a lot of money, and if you are not from the area in which they're looking to do things, they have no problem with the Arabs because they usually come with a lot of money. They have no problem letting women of colour into the clubs, as they would say, as long as the clientele is interested in those women. But it's not somewhere where you will find...
I don't for one moment believe that quite in the way that is being told.
She's also mentioning it as a singular incident.
Yes, but what... I mean, I don't even believe that singular incident. Because I would say what is happening there is that, in a way, what you have referred to, that one is, in a way, scanning the likely clientele. So it's not really that this person is black. It's that, I'm sorry, we don't want any chavs in. So if Chuka Amuna turns up...
class or something.
I mean, she does appear to have a propensity for wearing leopard print, so I don't know.
So if Chuka Amuna turns up, something tells me he gets in, even though he is black. Do you understand what I mean?
Possibly,
right.
But yeah, we don't know, so we'll just leave it at that. But that's the closest she comes to a concrete example, and she complains about all the times people think it's okay to touch her curly hair, and says she's not a pet. For a start, unless you are living in London, you are less than 3% of the population. So, you're gonna, if wherever you go, you're going to effectively be a novelty in the same way as a celebrity in that sense. So, if you're something different about your appearance, people are going to point it out. People are going to be interested, and especially this thing about touching hair seems to be something almost predominantly where it can be substantiated that comes from children, and children are just curious, and especially if they've not seen something before, they are curious. It's not, that sort of thing. Also seems to me, not to put too fine a point on it, Radlib, that it's also something that I could see, Americans doing much more than British people. But
hey now,
that sort of thing.
Now, by the way, this reminds me of a funny story. My father was trained by the founder of Jews for Jesus, Moishe Rosen, and Moishe went to speak back in the 50s or something like this in a small southern, I don't know if it was southern, but small rural area, and they just didn't have any Jews in that area. And so the marketing for his talk said, come hear Moishe Rosen speak at our church. See what Jesus looked like. Because he's Jewish, so that must be what... But it's even funnier if you know what Moishe Rosen looked like. He was a very large, kind of obese man. But anyway.
Anyway. So...
I would also like to point out that this saga we always hear, because this story comes up again and again and again, about people wanting to touch black women's hair. I have never encountered that. Neither, what I mean is, I have never been saying to a black woman, "Oh, can I touch your hair?" Nor have I ever seen anybody do that.
No, I've never had the interest personally.
When you say children, that sounds about most likely. I just cannot imagine that happening, and therefore, to me, this sounds a little bit like a myth.
That would be an interesting bit of context stripping, because that's one of the key tricks of the corporate press, right? Is that they will tell you something that is true, but with so much context stripped out that if you really had the full context, you'd feel deceived, right?
Yes.
So if it really happened that we questioned all these people talking about hair touching more closely, and maybe they're right, that adults have asked them, but let's say we questioned them more closely and said, so by any chance, were these very young people who has to touch your hair? And they all said yes. That casts a rather different light on it, wouldn't it?
It really does. In a similar way, so she says, racism is more than just calling someone the N-word. Notice she never says that she's been called the N-word. And so, again, it's just this kind of entitled thing where it's like, yes, occasionally you come across dickheads who say things which are, not very nice, or just slightly frustrating, or they have a personality that doesn't gel with you, or you misinterpret what they say, or they misinterpret what you say. This is just the fact of life. People are varied, diverse, if you will. So she's talking about how it's a real problem that she doesn't have the energy to respond to this person's posts.
Okay, now quick rabbit hole, or lupus, whatever it was. Okay, so energy, right? And then at the end of the article, she says, I'm tired. She uses the tired thing. This is a new trope. Yeah, she says, I can't help but roll my eyes. I'm tired of it all.
Oh.
So I've been following this great journalist for years, actually, Michael Tracy. He's a progressive, but he's a really great journalist. And so he's making fun of this trope in a recent tweet. He says, you guys, I am still so fucking tired. Center my voice right this very instant. That is, cave to my insane demands, or else I will never stop being tired. Apparently, the remedy for being tired these days is not to go to sleep, but to scream incoherently online. So anyway, this energy and tired thing, evidently this is a new cliche, you might say.
It is something I see a lot.
You've been noticing the pattern. Yeah,
yes,
okay.
Definitely. So they say, Cherry is a proud northerner who recently moved back to Stockport, Greater Manchester, where she grew up, studied journalism, funnily enough, in Sheffield, and was the first in her family to go to university. So she likes Coronation Street, apparently. But she says she needs advice about whether or not to click unfriend or reply. At which point, a social psychologist, which basically means a failed psychologist, as far as I'm concerned, says it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to safeguard your mental health, you need not approach that person. I don't think you'll feel very good after repeatedly engaging with people doing very racist things. Notice that it's gone from casual racism now to very racist things. You'll probably feel worse. But if you're hoping to make them post things that are less racist, consider hitting the reply button. If you're trying to remind other people that social norms do not permit this behaviour, address the person and have a conversation with them. Yes, because people love to be addressed, moralised to, talked down to, as a person coming in.
Particularly after the last 2 weeks.
Yes, indeed. So she's complaining that people are saying you're just playing the race card. And I come across that all the time when I come across racist and ignorant posts. Well, it would help because I've been listening to a lot of Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. And one of the greatest things that Milton Friedman does when he responds to a few things is he says, you can argue that, but the facts are against you. Is one of these statements that I see coming up quite a lot. And with that smile of his that infuriates everyone. And that sort of thing. It's and I love it because it doesn't take away, it doesn't belittle the person, but it does make it quite a valid point that just usually derails their entire line of inquiry, as it were. And then they start adding in extra things in this article from people who are there. So Alicia Standing 27 says, I started replying to comments, but it got bad. Someone told me I deserved to get raped while I was trying to explain why it's important that Black Lives Matter has its own voice versus All Lives Matter. There is no evidence for this post. They blow up the quote in big text and paste it in the middle of the page. But you'd think that for such a thing, they would black out the name and the profile picture of the person who's posting that, and actually put up the thing, because people don't have a right to privacy with anything they put on Facebook. Facebook owns everything that's put on there, and you can take screen caps from it, and it doesn't care. So
I'm sorry, I being an American, I'm a little slow on the uptake. I thought we were in a Guardian article, and when you pointed out that I'm looking at the article, when you pointed out someone told me I deserved to be raped in big block letters, I thought, what is the news source here? BBC.
This is the
BBC is
and people and
promulgating this.
And people wonder why the defund the BBC account gained something like 100,000 followers in 3 days.
Okay. Now the Britisher is tries to, I think, be a little less partisan and stuff. And so, what's your view, Britisher? I mean, do you feel like this is sort of par for the course, that you can't tell whether you're reading the BBC or the Guardian? Is there still distinctions to be made? Is it all just sort of blurring into one left-wing mess?
It's gradually beginning to blur. I mean, you used to be able to distinctly tell whether you were listening to the Guardian or the BBC.
That's what I expected.
At times, I would say there is still a difference between Guardian and BBC. So the BBC will at times still be willing to caveat things, as in to indicate that, of course, there is also a different opinion, even though we're riding with this one. Whereas the Guardian won't do that.
Of course, the Guardian's mostly opinion piece as well. So
yeah, but by now, yes, it's becoming harder and harder to keep the Guardian and the BBC apart.
Yeah, now I'm just looking at the URL slug here. I'm looking at the URL slug, but it is bbc.com/news. It says up in the URL, right?
Yeah.
So this is the news organization, I guess.
Yeah. It's the news arm of the BBC. Yes.
Right.
This is a story, an interest piece. But they share a selection of comments from the readers, which apparently they've gathered, but we don't know where from, because there is no comment section on this article. So it's very strange, but none of them are opposing her in any way. None of them are, calling out any of the bullshit. And effectively, at the end here, the last comment hidden right at the bottom, which I think is quite interesting, from Bim in Potter's Bar, UK. Because they have a load of people commenting on this from different countries without any recognition of their interest in or knowledge about British culture at all. So Bim from Potter's Bar in the UK says, my friend shared a post by We Are Great Britain that said, why are we demonstrating in England over a guy who died 1,000 miles away when no demonstration took place when white girls were raped in Rotherham? I simply asked him to remind me if anyone stopped people from demonstrating over the white girls, and also that the injustice of what happened to George Floyd angered people of all races as demonstrated by people showing their disgust. I don't know if it will change him, but at least he knows where I stand. He's still my friend, but I now know the type of person he is. Now, that's an interesting one because...
Where are you reading this, by the way? Because your quote was a little more extensive than what I'm seeing online.
I don't know. This is just I'll put it in the stream chat, and you can...
Because I'm seeing that exact quote, except the one I'm seeing is slightly toned down with a little bit clipped here and there from what you read out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But basically...
Don't know what that means.
Basically,
so wait, is this one of those BBC Guardian differences, perhaps, Britisher, that in the Guardian they wouldn't even share the story that would include the thing about comparing to the white girls being raped?
No.
Whereas here in the BBC, they at least allow it to be mentioned.
That could well be. As I say, the BBC is still willing to to kind of show that there is another side, even though they heavily come down on one side.
It's also it's ridiculous as well, because just to go back to the actual comment rather than distinctions between publications, if anyone stopped people from demonstrating over the white girls, I mean, Tommy Robinson, love him or hate him, or anywhere you happen to be in between, he was literally arrested and put out on bail on the condition that he didn't attend certain protests, which were protests about the rapes going on across the country. There were also protesters who've been arrested at various different events, and various organisers who have been threatened with legal action if they attempt to go to these sorts of things.
So this would be the equivalent would be if UK BLM leaders were being arrested, told you cannot be part of any more protests. Over,
if there was a clear leader of BLM, I mean, there are technically 3, but they've been quite shadowy. But if there was a clear leader, someone speaking out on behalf of the BLM protesters, then it's the equivalent of them being dawn raided because this is what happened to Tommy Robinson. He was dawn raided, charged with vandalism of a hotel door 500 miles away 3 months ago, that he was not connected to in any way as far as could be proven. And then told that he was released from custody the day set to be released the day after his protest was supposed to go ahead, and he was given the option that he could go out on bail as long as he did not attend this protest, which is why, and that's why he was able to use his solicitors to get that turned into a wrongful conviction and a wrongful.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's say he damaged the hotel door, like, some rock star trashing his hotel room or something, which maybe he does those sorts of things. I don't know. But what would that have to do with attending a protest? The connection seems pretty tenuous.
Exactly. Well, that's the narrative on that. There's also the one where like if you just take a look at the counter protest which happened in this country last week when it came to BLM. The state is quite clearly siding with BLM. There were over 100 people arrested at this latest protest. And I would say that probably, I'm going to be controversial here, I'm going to straddle my fence, and I'm going to say that probably most of those were justified. There's been a lot of stuff which has been lobbed, as far as I can tell, from both people on the ground and in the area, and friends of mine as well who were on scene, that the only group who behaved impeccably were the veterans, who stuck to the memorials and didn't antagonize people if it could be avoided. And the kind of more football hooligan-ish working class lads were the ones who were throwing their cans at police and hurling abuse at people, as well as chanting a lot. Which has been also, they've been throwing up the football salutes, which are the two-arm salutes, as they chant, which is very much in football culture. But this has been misconstrued by people like Afua Hirsch as Nazi salutes, which is obviously absolute rubbish.
And Gary Lineker.
They're so Nazi that they do a double Nazi salute.
Yes, indeed. And
you can't be more Nazi than that, Britisher.
So that sort of thing. Also, yes, people saying in chat, Tommy didn't go to the protest last week. Yeah, yesterday even, over the weekend. He didn't go because he knew that he would attract a lot more attention and so on. Anyway, so after everything, these cops, which were absolutely kitted out to the nines in their riot gear and so on and so forth, two of them were injured over the course of this protest. Noting that this is a smaller protest than BLM, so there's that to be a factor, and they've got better equipment on. But even so, this is dwarfed by the BLM protest violence, which injured 62 police officers. People keep saying 27 because that's what the original BBC article said, but it's been revised up to 62. And that's across the country. I think it was 27 specifically in London. And the things that were being thrown at the police were much heftier, seemed to be a mixture of bottles and bricks, and the people were being charged in the street. Most of the violence yesterday, because they've been talking about clashes, seemed to come from groups of armed BLM protesters charging the so-called right-wingers, but also isolating individual young white men and basically kicking the absolute crap out of them in the middle of the street. I know of at least 3 cases, possibly 4, where that happened. There was also potentially an attack with a knife, although that's also been called into serious question, and the footage is inconclusive, so I don't want to pass judgment on that one. But apparently someone was at least punched in the neck. Whether or not he was stabbed remains to be seen. Although the police at this point are saying they are not aware of any stabbing incidences. And yes, it's all very messy, and the double standard in terms of the reporting is so clear, because there were 100 protesters who were arrested over the weekend, and last weekend with the BLM thing, I think it was only 46 or something protesters were arrested, and obviously the violence there was something like 30 times what it was this weekend. So there seems to be a disproportionate media narrative on it, as well as the police narrative. It's horrendous. Harry Ann Gladive did do a video on it, as chat is saying, But I believe it's been taken down. It's been removed by YouTube. They're not allowing his dissent on this. But yes.
Whoa. They took down his video comparing the two protests, or?
I think so, yes.
Really? I think I was listening to that.
I know he put up on Twitter that the video had just been removed by YouTube, and he didn't have any messaging from them confirming why it was. There may have been an update since then, but that's that. Do I think the blatant double standard in reporting will actually red pill anyone, though? I don't think so, to be honest, because the people who are following the mainstream narrative are fairly sold on it. There's nothing actually, it's a lie by omission rather than an outright lie. So, aside from the language just being poor, unless you know someone who went to the protests, or unless you're deeply invested in the story, as obviously us on the political side are, it's very difficult to see. It's very difficult to see through the fog of the mainstream narrative. Unfortunately, I think for every person that it red pills, it's going to blue pill another person. I'd say, or at least two more. Apparently, the video is back up now with age restriction. Great.
My guess is they will more than likely argue it's because of depiction of violence. Is that correct?
I imagine so. Yeah.
The kind of things that CNN and Fox can show completely unrestricted.
Yeah.
But if any private person uploads it, they restrict it.
Yeah. Did anyone notice, just to take us onto slightly like a slight tangent connected to this, but we'll come back to it. Notice the Churchill photo mystery.
Oh,
yes, there was some
I don't know what
news
to make of
about
that.
Churchill not turning up when you Googled it.
Yeah, if you search for British Prime Ministers, they were all there in order except for Churchill, whose picture was missing.
So the spot was there. His name was there, right? If I remember
his name was there, yeah.
correctly.
Well,
just a blank.
His name was there for his second term, but not his World War II term.
Really?
So they missed out his slot before what's the name? The chap who Clement Attlee. They missed out his slot before Clement Attlee, but they had him back in what was it, 51, 52?
51.
Yeah.
So here's what I think. Tell me what you guys watch this stuff too. The pattern I'm noticing is, yes, there's institutional bias where the institution of Twitter and YouTube and so forth make certain decisions that I think are arguably biased politically. But then also it seems to me that there are just some random actors within the companies who do things which get reversed because it didn't represent sort of the institutional decision. It was just somebody went for it. Essentially they've got, I don't know, almost like left-wing trolls who work for them.
So
that's the impression I've got, because they will reverse a bunch of this stuff.
Yeah. So they've been running damage control. They claim that they were changing his image, which is interesting given that the timing of it. And they also claim that there is an issue with all premiers with non-consecutive terms. Sometimes their algorithm gets confused. But it is interesting, the timing of it. Like, does anyone actually think that this is, a genuine mistake by Google's automated systems?
I just don't know why? What are they going to gain from this? Do you think people
I'm in the same boat here?
Yeah, so I don't think that this was a move from Google itself. I think that this was a random actor who was pissed off with Churchill from within, who just decided to wipe him from the history books and see how long it lasted. That's what I think.
Yeah, that's probably more likely than it being some conspiracy to remove Churchill from like Wikipedia or whatever.
Yes, right.
Like, I don't think
I'm picturing something like hacker activity, right? Like hackers who hack into a company and do a sort of a stunt,
Well, not even necessarily need to be.
I don't think it's. I know, but I'm saying it. But I don't think it's like from the outside. I think it's sort of like, inside hacker, so to speak. Like I have access to these images. I'll just delete Churchill. It
was kind of like I ran a poll on my Twitter account earlier in the week, saying, since all these TV shows and stuff are being cancelled, is it the companies going, oh my God, we better kowtow to these people, or are there a bunch of Black Lives Matter activist types within these companies saying, well, this gives us an excuse to do it. And I don't think there's really any way to find out for sure.
And
so
unfortunately can never be proven. But I just don't trust the narrative coming out of Google on this either. So there's been people who have been trying to capitalize on this. I think an interesting point has been that Keir Starmer in the UK, who's the head of the UK Labour Party, after Jeremy Corbyn, whilst he has been accepted by a lot of the normies as being, a welcome voice of reason, that's the way he is construed, regardless of whether or not he actually is one. And obviously he has many skeletons in his own cupboard. But David Lammy has been making moves, I think, to attempt to secure the next Labour leadership, because he knows that he can... where's this now? He knows that he can capitalise on the Black Lives Matter protests in particular. Interestingly, very little in ways of commentary from Diane Abbott, but I think she's been effectively silenced by the party now that she's retired from the front bench and David Lammy is stepping up. He says that the PM has promised, because Boris Johnson has promised a new commission that's designed to look at racial inequality in the UK. This would be because every study for the past 30 years which has come out about British racism in Britain shows that racial prejudice is decreasing in Britain as a whole. Even from 2008 to 2020, the amount of people who said that they would be happy if their child married someone of another race went from something like 86% or something went from 65% to 86%. So there's only and most people just are fairly don't really care. It's a non-issue for them. Couple this with various studies across Europe, and you find that Britain is the least racist country in Europe, with the exception of somewhere like Sweden, I think it was. So we're doing pretty all right up there. So Boris Johnson says, let's have a new commission, and David Lammy, as the Shadow Justice Secretary, said it lacked detail and was written on the back of a fag packet, which I think was a bit of hyperbole from him. But he says that there are several studies which have already been carried out by the Labour Party and by activists financed by the Labour Party that have already published something stupid like 300 reforms that could be made. And he says, implement these reforms and Black Lives Matter go away. And I think he's basically trying to pass himself off as a strong leader for a potential leadership election, and also he's offering Boris Johnson's government a get-out clause for something which, of course, we know would never work. They just demand more and more and more. Any thoughts on this? Have you seen this story?
Well, you say he says these things. I caught some of his saying these things.
Yes.
I wouldn't say he was so much saying them as shouting them.
Yes, he was very loud, but that doesn't address the meat of what he's actually saying, Britisher. But...
Well, no, I think it does by now, because everybody in that camp is doing nothing else but shouting and screeching.
He is shouted about how something needs to be done effectively. There's a lot of is continued to be repeated. Something needs to be done, and it's very frustrating for those of us on this side as well, because something needs to be doneism is sort of like a cult, especially amongst politicians. He is talking about you can understand why it feels like, yet again in the UK, we want figures, data, but we don't want action. It's like, yes, because you can't take action if you don't have the figures in, especially if all of the figures go against your current narrative. The police crime rate, the police crime rate? Yeah, so the police brutality rate against anyone, or in particular the ethnic minority population, is not disproportionate. In fact, it is so small because we have such a little so little police brutality in this country that 3 people can deeply skew the statistics from the past decade, so that nobody can come up with things. And even then, the things which are considered to be, abuses of police power have been things like negligence. So, for instance, I mentioned on the stream either last week or the week before that we'd received a letter. I'd received an email from my university talking about various people who had died in police custody. One of them was a drug addict who died of an overdose. One of them was suicidal and didn't receive a psych eval in time, and so was not put on suicide watch and killed themselves. And one of them had severe mental health difficulties, didn't really understand what was going on, and became violent, and there was a misuse of power there, for which the police officer involved was very heavily disciplined. But again, it's all a matter of perspective, and as you dive deeper into these cases and you get a little bit more information, it becomes clear that it's not an issue of racial prejudice that is coming to the fore, and we don't appear to have very much of, we don't even have the same legal history as, say, somewhere like the US has, with Jim Crow and that sort of thing. So it's very frustrating to see this narrative pushed. David Lammy, obviously, we know, runs everything in the country, but that meme aside, he has modelled himself after Al Sharpton. It's clear in the way that he speaks, in the way in which he does his speeches, and we do not need an Al Sharpton over here. I mean, I would say that the US didn't need an Al Sharpton either, but we particularly don't need one over here. Any thoughts, gentlemen? Because I'm aware I am rambling here.
Well, I did just say that for those who don't have the context, Al Sharpton is, I think, a quite sinister figure. He has, I think, fairly reasonably been accused of inciting violence that resulted in people's deaths. This isn't just a little harmless race hustling to, prop up his own position and feel important or something like that. I mean, he's really done damage, in my view. I don't know if David Lammy is actually quite as bad as Al Sharpton. You'll have to tell me.
Oh, he's not. He's just modelled himself after him.
Yeah, he's got sort of stylistically. I see what you mean, but I don't think he's been as harmful yet.
No, he's a race baiting racist himself, who has one of the highest expense rates of any of the MPs, which he blamed on Jaffa Cakes. So he misuses public funds quite often, and he's an insufferable man who has not put forward a sensible policy position in his entire time. He is very good at the rhetoric, and occasionally he comes out with a speech which, without any digging deeper, sounds great on the face of it for the people listening. I think it would convince people.
Well, I think the word you're looking for is demagoguery.
Yes. I think he has a certain charisma, even though he is...
you do?
I do. I think that he resonates with people. I mean, especially the left wing. I see whenever he makes a speech, he's fairly popular with the left, and they share his stuff all the time. And I think that he has a kind of charisma that appeals to the intellectually and politically deficient.
That's just it. I differ with you there. I think that what is happening with the left and sharing his material and whatever is white guilt. It's that feeling that we must, because we owe so much, blah blah blah.
Yeah, but he's convinced them, even if he's played into their white guilt narrative.
And I'm just not sure that this is somebody who is persuading and winning people over with charisma and whatever, because I just don't think it's there.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about like the normies. Are the normies gonna be drawn in the way that, say, I may be wrong, but I gather that Martin Luther King was able to influence people who were kind of, not hard in one side or the other. Well, they were just open, being swayed, and they heard him speak, and they were like, "Yeah." Well,
I wouldn't say he, I wouldn't put him on a par with Martin Luther King. But,
no. But my point is just that I gather that Martin Luther King was able to influence through charisma and good speaking and persuasive points and so forth. He was able to persuade people who were open to being persuaded. Right, there were hardline people on both sides who were just going to be where they were.
Yeah.
But what you're looking for are those marginal people, those people in the middle who might go one way or the other. And I think what the British are saying, sure, his team might share his stuff. That doesn't mean that the normie on the street is going to be like, I have seen the light. Lammy has really persuaded me.
You see, when it comes to the normie on the street, I mean, there's a gentleman with whom I would really, really like to have a conversation right now. He is at the end of my street, and of course, everything is still locked down and whatever. And this is a chap of advanced years, so he's obviously keeping himself to himself. But I remember having a conversation with him a while back. And you have to understand, this chap he's conservative, but very mild-mannered, very mild conservative, never had a bad word to say about anybody, extremely polite, always very dapper, always extremely well turned out. A Rotarian, I think you get the image.
Yes.
And when I spoke to him in the middle of the Theresa May crisis, when everything was going pear-shaped, when politicians were talking to the EU behind the government's back and things like that.
Yeah.
I had a word with him, and for just a moment there was a flicker in his eyes, and he said, I would hang the bloody lot of them. And I sort of, I kind of smiled, sort of thinking, well, is this a joke he's building up to? And he just looked at me and went, no, this is treason. I would hang the bloody lot of them. And this is what I mean. This is a very mild-mannered chap. He's, for all the years I've known him, and, we're talking 25 years now, I've never heard him say anything of the kind. So this is not one of these people that on Twitter gets called based, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's quite the opposite. They would all call him a cuckservative and whatever. And
it's not rubber, is it?
Sorry? Oh, yeah. And suddenly you saw something there, where, as in, this man's limit had been reached. He'd had enough. And I think that this has now been going on for some time. I think that's why the Red Wall crumbled in the north of England. And I think we are seeing the same trend continue. If people are somehow thinking that, oh, well, now we've seen these demonstrations in London, so clearly this is, the left strikes back and the pendulum is swinging, forget it. It's swinging the other way. If anything, what we have seen has, this has only increased that phenomenon. People
I would guess that, but do you have actually some kind of indication of that? Some evidence for believing that?
No evidence, because that would require surveys and things like that.
Just anecdotal. It sounds to me like you're putting yourself in the place of the fellow down the street.
No, honestly, I've had various conversations that were not on Twitter, where I've had people who were in the past ardent left-wingers.
Conversations, Britisher,
Yes,
not on Twitter. But Twitter
yes.
is the place where conversations happen.
Or even in the Twitter DMs with people who are not normally public Twitterati, but who speak with me behind the scenes. And who basically are indicating, I'm sick of it now. I can't take much more of this.
I know that certainly most of the veterans that I know are fairly reserved characters when it comes to their politics, but this whole thing regarding especially the cenotaph has pissed a lot of people off.
I was going to I just want to draw a quick distinction between the situation in the US and the UK, because I gather that there hasn't been anything quite as symbolically significant for Americans that's happened. They did topple a statue of Christopher Columbus, so that might have angered Italians, which is not a move I would make personally. But anyway, but I don't, talking about attacking the Alamo, they talked about doing it, didn't do it yet, at least. That would bring Texas down on you. But there hasn't been anything like, say, the Vietnam War Memorial would maybe be a moral equivalent to the cenotaph, I'm guessing. If someone were to deface the Vietnam War Memorial, I gather that would be something like, for us, what the cenotaph defacement was for you guys, right?
Well, the cenotaph is a great stone column in the middle of London, and it represents all of our... It says, to the glorious dead, and it is representing all of our dead through all conflicts, really. And obviously starting from the Great War, World War One. But it's more symbolic than that, because much like we observe Remembrance Day every November on the 11th, which is a commemoration of the end of the First World War, but it is also a commemoration of all past and future conflicts, and the British people have a very, very, very strong connection to this. This is the sort of thing that towns stop everything for.
To basically sort of hook into that, I had a conversation with someone who is, let's say, from one of the red states of North England. A place that has voted Labour since since the constituency has been created, if you know what I mean. Whose entire family is deep red, who has deep red connections within the family, as in they are not just people who vote Labour. Some of them have been politically active.
Right.
Who has himself got memories of meeting Tony Blair before he became PM and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And who said to me, the cenotaph is the line.
Yeah.
They've crossed the line.
So he was specific about it being the cenotaph that really...
That one said, yes, said basically the cenotaph, you touch that, you're dead. And, in that regard, I have got some quite strong views too. When it comes to the cenotaph, and particularly when it comes to Churchill, when it comes to that statue, which clearly they want, as far as I'm concerned, you don't box it up. You basically draw a ring of steel around it, and you say, anybody touches that,
and they get they get the gallows. The funny thing is, like, the reason I think the American statue pulling hasn't been so successful as well is because the ones that they've defaced have just been the ones counter to their narrative as absolutely subversive mentions there. Look up the memorial for the 54th Regiment. I think that was it Massachusetts?
Yes, the Black Regiment.
The Black Regiment. And they've just put, all pigs. And in a similar fashion, in this country, whilst they've marked something like 100 statues that they want to take down, a number of them were fervent slavery abolitionists, or they've just found a random statue that happens to be of someone who it turns out was anti-slavery, and just
very strange.
And because the amount of historical ignorance in the country at the moment, our educational system is absolutely, it talks about, they changed the way that they did it from learning dates and figures and events to picking out a few key events and then looking at what it was like for, a day in the life of an English peasant in a particular era, a day in the life of a British nobleman in a particular era. No names, very vague dates, and so it was like you had these eras of kind of Tudors, Victorians, Elizabethans, and what was it like to live in these periods as, say, a factory worker or someone who lived in a big house. That's the extent of it. There was no talk about the political change, there was no talk about the social change, there was, you learned about kids going in and cleaning machines in the industrial sector, but you don't learn about the reforms or anything to do with the way it was, anything was implemented, unless you go on and obviously do a degree. I certainly didn't notice any of it up to and including GCSE level, which is our up to the age of 16, really, we just don't teach it. Learned a little bit about the American Revolution, but nothing really concrete other than that.
So, before we skate past it too much, I wanted to ask about the boxing of the Churchill statue, because maybe this, I don't know if this is a UK versus US thing, or it's just I'm personally just not getting it, but it seemed like a reasonable way to protect it. But I could see from the comments, and now Britisher has voiced it himself, I could see from the reaction of people actually in the UK that they were quite offended by putting a box around the statue. It wasn't just viewed as, oh, well, that's one way to protect the statue in the midst of all this. It was viewed as, help me understand why this is so offensive.
It was censorship. It was just, the statue may not have been there. It looked like another great, ugly modern art piece. They made the thing something like 25 foot high so that people couldn't throw things over on top of the statue. And it was completely completely opaque.
Your objection, Britisher, is architectural? You don't like the style?
No. My objection to this is simply that this is basically one of the nation's greats, if not the nation's greatest.
He is, yes, he's
and
a hero.
This is basically what would the Americans make of the fact of the Lincoln Memorial having to be completely sort of obliterated from sight?
You're talking to the wrong American on that particular topic, but go ahead.
Because a bunch of people behaving like savages basically will just destroy it no matter what. So, as such, yes, you don't give them what they want really and hide the whole thing away. No, it's there. It stands. And we celebrate this man whether you think you can cope with it or not.
So you're saying that the box is really being viewed as a concession to the attacks on the statue.
Yes, it seems that way. Well, I saw a video, interestingly, from Lindy Beige. I think you must have seen it as well, Britisher. Which is why it says people need heroes, statues are good, or something like that. And he points out that one of the reasons why Britain has like more statues per square mile than almost any other country on Earth, and we're basically like a big open air museum. And we commemorated acts, usually the building of various institutions and private industry or public figures who did great things. So when Winston Churchill was there. Obviously, the greatest thing for him and for all of Britain is that it commemorates our victory over the Nazis. It commemorates the wartime spirit and several of the great speeches that Churchill made, and his ability to pull the country together at a time at which it was, no one else seemed able to do the job, and he stepped up to the plate. Now, he was controversial enough that he was voted out after his term, and he obviously came back on a new thing. He's made various comments which assert that he's, as a product of his time, he definitely showed the British character as he saw us as superior, and in particular he saw Western nations as superior. There was definitely a racial element to it, but he's a product of his time, right? And we are celebrating the act of what he did more than that. Now the BLM protesters and more have come back and screamed Bengal famine at him. At everyone who dares, bring up the fact that he defeated the Nazis. And I think this is interesting. There's a twit longer here, which I believe was sent to you, Britisher. But I will read this now just quickly. It's not too long, but and people on stream can see it. So it says, I've been meaning to sit down and do the maths on this for a while, and I'll preface this by saying I've been criticised with some assumptions on calorific intake needed. But I feel that there are a lot of big numbers that get thrown around with the Bengal famine that don't quite add up when you work them out. The famine was for a single year. 3 million people died in the maximum estimates, and we're going to go with a high figure because of the damages that starvation causes in general. One human requires 24 bushels of grain for a year, found off medieval estimates, and India was mostly pre-industrial, it's a fair estimation. So 3 million people thus require about 72 million bushels to cope with a famine. With those assumptions, some maths. A bushel is about 0.03 metric tons. India had about 1 million tons of grain in storage, or 36 million bushels. So they've got about half that they would need to feed the starving. So Churchill was blamed for two particular issues. He denied Canada aid shipment to India, which was sending 10,000 tons of wheat. This person questions why this matters. It's about 367,000 bushels, or enough to feed roughly 15,000 mouths, ignoring the likely loss of cargo due to the Germans sinking and the Japanese regional control. Why would he permit a long-haul shipment through enemy waters to feed a few thousand that could otherwise go to the UK, which was already rationing food, and sometimes down to mere weeks of grain supply? Seems irresponsible. The Australian end of the story might be a bit more interesting, with Australia having produced 3.2 million tonnes of wheat in 1943. Due to famine, they had also had this drop to 1.5 million tonnes in 1944, so they too were suffering a shortage. Of this, it's known that roughly 1.5 million tonnes were exported in 1943, which was around half their production totals. So Churchill made sure that 350,000 tonnes of this was redirected to India to relieve their famine, which is a surprisingly generous quarter of their total export, which is around 500,000 extra people. But if all of it was shipped to India, then sure, it would have barely covered the other half of the needs. But again, World War II was happening, and the UK itself was already rationing, and they didn't know what was going to happen. So it seems dishonest to blame Churchill for the famine or claim he engineered it, when in fact the shipments that he did send were considered generous at the time, and it's the end of the British Empire in the middle of World War II. German and Japanese are attacking all the cargo ships. There are U-boats in the waters. All he did was actually try to feed the Indians. The only thing he stopped was 10,000 from Canada, which seems ridiculous as proof of some grand conspiracy, and I'll leave it there. Thoughts, gentlemen, in terms of that? Do you agree with this estimation, Britisher? Do you think this seems rational to you?
Well, I mean, those figures, and I don't know how many bushels a human being needs per year, but the reasoning behind it sounds rational. I think one of the things people also turned to was the fact that there was a reserve in India.
Yes.
And I believe that was kept because one kept it for the army. Because, of course, the Japanese were in Burma. So, I mean, anybody who looks at the map will realize that Burma borders India, or at least it did then. So they kind of realized, look, we're up to our necks here. It's getting desperate. We need to secure the food supply of the army in order to hold these people off. Because, frankly, the last thing India needs is Japanese rule. Rape of Nanking, anyone? So the fact that this is always held against him is deeply, deeply unfair. You might as well hold the sinking of the French fleet against him. There were some horrible decisions the man had to take, but it wasn't as if he was taking them simply because he wanted to do it. It was precisely the opposite. And I just think, it's what would anybody do in that situation? Would you sooner feed the people and lose the war?
Yes. At our most desperate hour.
It's interesting you bring up the Asian front, Britisher, because I gather that not everybody, perhaps, but some people are going to be very focused on the events in Europe and how whatever's going on in India relates to Europe, and they're not even going to think about what you just brought up, which is that there's a whole nother part of the war going on with Japan.
Yeah.
And India is neighbors to that part of it. Probably most of the people making this charge against Churchill are not thinking of the Asian part of the war, whatever you want to call that part of the war, the fight against Japan at all.
And they're more than likely also not... they're not also paying a lot of attention to just how charming an empire the Japanese one was.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you haven't noticed, I would say Antifa, for example, is pretty focused on Nazis. Perhaps to the exclusion of some other context because believe it or not, Nazis weren't the only thing going on in the middle of the 20th century. There were some other things going on too, as bad as the Nazis were.
Yeah. Right. So one of the statues that I mentioned that have been vandalized in America, for instance, California even, sorry, is they vandalized the statue of John Greenleaf, a Quaker abolitionist known for his anti-slavery writings.
Yep.
Where they've put something which looks like F slave gurus or something like that. I can't see what's written on it. But, as someone's put underneath, never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. Thank you, George Carlin, for that particular one. The other thing, just touching briefly on coronavirus in the side of this, I know that the police have been calling for the government to ban protests larger than 6 people. I have no idea how on earth that would ever be enforced. But also, the shops have started to open, which has shown that everyone has queued through the night, especially in central London, in order to access places like Primark on Oxford Street. Your favourite. It's just here's the article here, but you can
wasn't there some Nike trainer shop where they were all pressed up against the glass?
Yes. So the big thing with this is, of course, that there's absolutely no social distancing whatsoever going on, and again, just nobody cares. Oh, apparently, chat is telling me that the law has now been nodded through. I have no idea how on earth it's going to be enforced, given that the police seem completely ineffectual to the tens of thousands of people who turned up for the BLM protest, and the defenders are suitably pissed off at this point.
Well, they could have been perfectly effectual. They just didn't want to be.
Well, but the British way has never been the way of Macron. We're not going to. Are you really suggesting that we're going to start tear gassing and beating people in the street?
When it comes to clearing an area using tear gas, it's pretty effective.
It is.
You don't need to go and beat people up. You can just clear it that way.
I don't know. It's been ages since I've been gassed, so I can't say. I remember it being pretty nasty though.
Hey, quick! I distracted real quick by a point. I found an article talking about BLM protesters defacing statues of people who helped Black people, abolitionists, and
yes.
This was interesting. A Polish hero of the War of Secession from Britain, Tadeusz Kościuszko.
Yes, my Polish friends are absolutely raging about this.
Yeah, so this guy fought against Britain when the colonies were seceding. His will dedicated all his assets to buy the freedom and education of African American slaves. But this is what caught my attention. In this article, it mentions some anti-Semitism from protesters. Now, I have to be careful because it starts out by talking about France, and the situation in France. I don't know very much about it. But it says that protesters vandalized and damaged Congregation Beth Ahaba, a more than 200-year-old Reformed congregation in Richmond, Virginia. Schools, synagogues, Jewish memorials in Los Angeles were vandalized with anti-Semitic, anti-Israel slogans. The Jewish-owned businesses were looted. I mean, the hypocrisy game gets boring, but, one can't help but notice that I ran across this in a non-mainstream article, and had the same thing happened and been done by, someone viewed as right-wing.
If the MAGA types had done that, yeah.
If the MAGA types had done this, the whole world would know, right?
Yeah.
So that's
we over here had. We presently are having an example held aloft of some Black guys. One in particular was caught on camera carrying a white chap to safety who had been beset by a gang.
This recent weekend, not the one before, right? Where
this is kind of being held up this being held up as an example. Now, much as this was great of these chaps to do that, I wonder what the colour of the people was who were actually trying to kill him at the time when he needed saving.
They haven't been talking about that.
No, that hasn't been pointed out at all.
Ah.
It's all been a mess. But I want to. We are running a little bit low on time, so I want to bring us onto the last story, which is, of course, the man who urinated next to the PC Palmer Memorial during the protests yesterday. They talk about him.
This didn't seem to be a purposeful, unlike so many of the things we've been discussing.
Oh no,
this didn't seem to be a purposeful act of vandalism.
No.
He just peed in the wrong place.
Yeah, he just peed in the wrong place. He was ignorant, it seems. He was not even looking in the area. It's not like he's, putting his fingers up to it or anything like that. So the police asked for information on this. He handed himself in. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. They rushed him through the process. He's now been jailed for, I believe it's 14 days. 2 weeks he's been imprisoned for doing this. It's ridiculous, it reminds me of Dankula, what are you in for? I weed next to a memorial. I made a meme, that sort of thing. So Andrew Banks, his name is, he was sentenced to 14 days. He pled guilty to outraging public decency, which is one hell of a crime in the first place.
Academic approves, right?
Sorry?
It's like flag burning.
Yeah.
Academic agent approves. It's like flag burning.
Speaking of flag burning, I put out a tweet earlier in the day because so this story had come through, but of course the chap who stood on the cenotaph and attempted to set the Union flag on fire we've heard nothing about. There's no record of an arrest. There's no ongoing investigation, and whilst they've put now a barrier up around the cenotaph, which is thankfully not as tall as the thing is, and you can still see it. There's been no talk about reprimanding any of the people who were there, which has been used by the left wing, of all people, to say, oh, well, the far-right protests are clearly far more violent than our protests because only 46 people were arrested at ours and over 100 were arrested at yours, despite ours being much larger. Whereas I would say that that's indicative of our two-tier policing system. The fact that, I hope that the police officers who went down there, ill-equipped, who had things thrown at them, obviously a large number of them, everyone that was injured should sue for, being sent in underprepared for this thing. Especially when given that the next week they've been sent out, in riot gear, I think, presumably to alleviate that concern, aside from the fact that Sadiq Khan has claimed that it's a far-right protest.
When you say there hasn't been much done for the other side, regarding the other side, just look at the Colston statue being toppled. There are plenty of photographs going around with them proudly standing there with the statue, many of them not wearing masks. We all know where to look for them at Bristol University. It shouldn't be too difficult to find these people. And I would think that Bristol Police are more than likely not even trying.
Well, given the wealth of professionals that the Met has working for it to look over the whole of the UK's Twitter history, you would think that they'd be able to hunt them down, wouldn't you? But no.
You would think it should be a matter of a few hours of finding these people, and I think we would have heard by now if they would have all been hauled up in front of court.
Yeah. And it's not.
Someone drew a parallel, getting in a little marketing for your atrocity project, Mark, which is awesome.
Yeah,
awesome project. Somebody mentioned a parallel that I thought was interesting, which is that they thought of what we're seeing is the same thing we've seen with the so-called grooming gang scandals. That is, the police being afraid to act because they would of racism.
Yes, there's definitely an aspect to that.
Right. If they really were very law and order in the midst of the BLM protests, then certainly we know the left wing would say you're being racist. We're just trying to express
Police
our
brutality,
anger.
racism, yada yada. Yeah.
Exactly. And so they know that. They're not dumb, right? They can see two moves ahead, come down hard on the BLM protests, even as they're getting rather out of control. We know what's going to happen.
Well, what is needed is you send in the police and you tell them to, if need be, crack some skulls. And as the police is about to go in, the Prime Minister turns up on television and says, "Oh, and by the way, we're not wearing that this is racism. Anybody in that square, clear out of the way, because we're not having it." And it needs some leadership. And when it comes to what this government has been doing over this time,
in silence.
It's just been so pathetic.
It's deafeningly silent. Right. I am going to run through the super chats for this evening because we are certainly a little bit behind. So, we got here. Mad Beastie Yeti says, "Yo, Russia just sent one of your colonial citizens from Canada to the labour camps on false claim of spying." I've not seen anything about this. Have any of you heard anything about Russia sending a Canadian to a labour camp?
Nope. I was aware that China has been sort of holding a few Canadians because of the Huawei thing. But I'm not aware that Russia had any Canadians. No.
There's nothing that's coming up on an initial search, unfortunately. But thanks for the super chat. Coney says, "AA thinks pendulum theory is cope. Do you agree?" I think that... I don't know. I think that for pendulum theory to hold any weight... it certainly holds weight in terms of why the left got into power at the beginning of the millennium. Which is because the right went too far, then the left went too far, and the Tories had to claw it back by claiming that they were going to run an austerity policy, which wasn't austerity, but moving on from that. But whether or not it's a recurring phenomena, I can't really say, especially given that the Conservatives have been in power for the vast majority of the last couple hundred years, Any thoughts, Britisher?
Oh, I think there's definitely a pendulum.
Okay. But do you think people...
I've got a comment.
Go on it.
I've got a comment. Is that I think you can combine Higgs effect he talks about. That is, he's talking about, the state growing in times of crisis, and then when the crisis is over, it never really shrinks.
Yeah.
It was, right? Well, if you think of the one, but you don't think of it as being a center that stays in the same place, the center keeps moving. Each time the pendulum, the new center has moved to the left, right?
Right.
So sure, it kind of swings back and forth, but we don't come back to where we were under disreign, right? We the center of gravity being left.
You're cutting out quite a lot there, Random, I'm afraid. So the center of gravity is moving in terms of the pendulum.
Yeah. So over time.
I see. I think that such a thing would be hard to model, but as a concept, it's got some water. Whether or not we can judge where the pendulum is currently swinging is a matter for history, but we shall see. Makuta Pterodax says, "I've just realised now, Peter Hitchens with a beard is just something else. I sent a meme in Fake Access Unite channel on Discord demonstrating why." Yes, I put the image up briefly during the stream as a Third Biscuit reference. But yes, he does look suitably different, slightly crazed with a beard. George says,
"Everyone looks slightly crazed with a beard."
Thanks, mate. George says, "Are we happy yet that the number of multiracial couples depicted in British TV adverts is proportional to the number of said couples in Britain?" Is it?
Sorry, what?
I don't think...
Come again?
Are we happy yet that the number of multiracial couples depicted in British TV adverts is proportional to the actual number of said couples in Britain? I've not seen anything on this, but I would guess that in terms of TV representation, they would be grossly overrepresented.
Of course it is.
Yes.
Who
Apparently,
watches TV anymore?
News CBC covered the Russia situation. If one of you could just quickly give that a Google, apparently. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, CHAZ needs the Alderaan treatment. Such dens of subversion would not be tolerated under Palpatine. Certainly not. Mighty Balzac says, 20-year-old Britisher lent Caesar his ears and never got them back. Britisher.
Sorry, I was just looking for a Russian story. What was that? Something Caesar lent his ears or whatever?
You lent, when you were 20 years old, you lent Caesar your ears and never got them back.
Yes, I think it was. Mark Antony asking the crowd to lend him their ears, but close enough.
Matthew Hatch says, so the progressives have established gun-enforced laws. Yes, this is the other thing about CHAZ. Apparently it's a gun-free zone, and yet people are open carrying around it. No free speech. No, it's just whoever has a microphone shouts the loudest and screams that they're black loudest, which comes into conflict with other people doing exactly the same thing. It's an ethno-state of thought. Yes, and in many ways it is a two-tier class system where black people are allowed to just extort money from the other races. It has border control, segregation, and the one-drop rule. Exactly. Hikari Manikaniko says, Japan is not an island either. Yes, I think one of us, possibly myself, said that England was an island as opposed to Britain being an island. And I was joking that...
yes, I was triggered slightly.
Yes, England and its tributaries, its parasites, is an island. That's the way it is. Joking.
Not biting.
Joking, of course. Matthew Hatch says, I wasn't aware Japan wasn't an island, though. I wonder what it is. Matthew Hatch says, reference the complaint...
Islands? Multiple?
Possibly. Reference the complaint about being asked where you're from. How does this not extend to whites who are not asked, as it is just assumed that they're native? Oh, very true, very true.
Well, I get asked things like, yeah, but do you belong to the village that I live in?
That's only because you sound Bulgarian, man.
No. And that's the thing. My family been in the same place for 5 generations, so I'm like, yes. Yes, I do. They're like, no, you're an incomer.
How? Yes.
Only 5 generations.
How dare you? That's how dare you? What was I saying? The English loyalist says, as an American Indian, I find the USA and UK not as racist as people say. No one has oppressed me or kept me from doing what I want. BLM are the true racists.
Yeah, but they've redefined what racist is. It's not just what you or I would describe racism as. This whole prejudice plus power nonsense.
Drunk Shovel says, I love your chap from up the street, Britisher. He's quite based.
Well, as I say, I don't. I mean, first off, I hate that term, and I'm beginning to dislike it more and more.
Oh, I'm going to have to start calling you the based Britisher from now on.
Yes, yeah. A based, to my mind, means I am right wing and I agree with you. That's what describing someone as based really seems to mean. And I actually think that this, rather gentle-minded gentleman I am talking about would be appalled at being thought of as what people think of based people being. It's just that, yes, I think, I really do think things are getting a bit much, and it's beginning to grind the gears. And I think sooner or later there will be a reaction to this, and people may be surprised as to how vehement it will be when it comes.
Well, I think that it's not even that silent of a majority. I mean, it's clear that from all of the polling, and as we know, never trust a poll, but it's clear from all the polling that support for the BLM protesters, outright support, is about 11%. And that kind of support for the message but not the actions is a lot higher, right? So that's about that's around 30% more. But because the actions are what is being done. Most people are going. I mean, even black people that I know are basically turning around and they're going, right, I can understand the protest. They haven't done their research or whatever. They're going, and they haven't lived in America and so on. And I wouldn't. In fact, I'm going off on a tangent here myself anyway. But even they are saying, I can understand the protest. Racism is bad, etc. But I don't understand the rioting. It's like you're pissed off at the government and the government-sponsored police force, so you burn down your local post office. Doesn't seem to have much of a connect with the regular person. And so if you take those people plus the people who are opposed to what's going on, then you end up with 73% of the population who are opposed to the actions of Black Lives Matter, if not the message. So it's a very, it's clear that most people are not on board with this, despite what the elites and the political elites in particular are saying. Let me see what Hikari Manikaniko says, the cenotaph pissed me off, and I'm not even British. Thanks for that.
I think the cenotaph really did touch a raw nerve, to be honest.
Yeah. Architect of Fate says, my apologies for being late today. Alas, I still have a job I need to show up to. When is Dankula getting arrested for his Branson pug video? Has he released another video with the pug again?
No, about a year ago he did one. Bronson.
Yes, Bronson.
But yeah, Dank tweeted out earlier on that he's got a Nazi pug update.
Oh, that's coming, is it?
Yes.
Oh, dreadful, dreadful.
So it's probably going to be something to do with the appeal.
Yeah. I hope so. It's going to be exciting nonetheless. Sorry, where am I? Dashboard. Should be coming in now. Mad Beast Yeti says they were just sentenced today. It was covered on CBC at noonish. 16 years of hard labour. Yes, I've got the article here now. Severe sentence for US Canadian man shows Russia using courts as political tool. Global Affairs. Global Affairs Canada says Russia is using its judicial system as a political tool after a US Canadian citizen was sentenced Monday to 16 years in a maximum security prison colony. They are deeply concerned about it. The statement comes after his twin brother, David, accused the Canadian government of silence in an interview with CTV on Monday. Paul has maintained his innocence since he was arrested in December 2018 outside a Moscow hotel on espionage charges. This is the Canadian government has only issued stock responses, and everyone is waiting for the Kremlin to offer an exchange, but it seems to be there. Unfortunately, I have kind of no other real context around this, but apparently Whelan 50 has decried the prison conditions, reportedly underwent surgery last month for a hernia. He told he's now being held in the Canadian embassy in Moscow because he's had fresh fruit and vegetables which aren't provided in prison. I think it's horrendous that that's going on, and that sort of things. Any comments from anyone else on the stream?
No, but I've just seen Neil Hamilton with a beard as well, and it's quite unnerving.
Oh, there we go. That's glad that you could contribute.
You could always provide him with a suggestion to shave it. As long as you handed it to him in a brown envelope, he'll more than likely read it.
Okay, and finally for this evening, Architect of Fate says, come on everyone, let's get #Based Britisher trending. This is a message I wholeheartedly support. I will introduce Britisher next week as the ever-based Britisher, which I'm sure he will absolutely adore. Won't you, Britisher? You're always happy to come back to that.
I hate you.
You're going to have to take a break from this stream as well.
Oh dear, you might need to. It's coming on. Thank you very much to everyone for coming along for this stream today. That's been, I think it's been a good one. Thank you very much to my guests. Thank you to Tailed Feature for coming along. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for my guest from over the pond. Thank you for your contributions this evening, Radlib.
Thank you, and I'm going to market my show, if I may, for just a moment.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Mad Mercenary the Deep Lore Econ are having a guest that some of you may remember.
Oh dear, you're cutting out rather badly.
We got about half of that.
We got about half. So I would say that Radical Liberation runs a stream on the channel of the same name called Deep Lore Econ Chat, which is a reference to the Academic Agents Discord server. And he runs it with a chap called the Mad Mercenary and various other guests that he has on. So if you're interested in kind of longer style talks about economic matters that are going on, then please feel free to subscribe to his channel and check it out. Yes, and of course, thank you very much to the Britisher for joining us as always and suffering through my nonsense as always.
That's fine, Ivan.
You give as good as you get. Please leave a like and a comment on the stream if there's any problems, or if there's something that you want to see, or a guest that you want me to try and grab, because I am doing my best to try and get interesting guests, and at least 2 on each week at the moment. Then please let me know. Other YouTubers or other figures, try and keep it manageable. I won't be able to get Boris Johnson on here or anything like that, but it'd be great to hear from the audience in the comment section. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and have a great week.
Hiva.
Toodle pip.